I was 17 the day I lost everything. My little brother, Daniel, was barely 10. Our parents had died in a car accident just a week prior, and we were still drowning in grief when our uncle, Richard, showed his true colors. Up until that moment, I had thought of him as a kind but distant relative, the successful, well-dressed businessman who would visit us during the holidays, always bringing Daniel and me expensive gifts and flashing his perfectly practiced smile. But when he stood in our parents' lawyer's office, claiming he would take care of everything, I had no idea he meant that he would take everything. Our father had built a small empire, a chain of luxury hotels, real estate, and investments that ensured Daniel and I would never have to struggle. But none of that ever made it into our hands. Uncle Richard manipulated the will, bribed whoever he had to, and took control of our family's entire fortune. Then, without an ounce of shame, he looked me in the eye and said, "It's for the best, Michael. You're almost a man now. You can make your own way." And just like that, I was thrown out onto the street. I remember that night vividly. The rain had soaked through my thin jacket, my suitcase was stuffed with nothing but a few sets of clothes, and I had nowhere to go. Meanwhile, Daniel was sitting inside our parents' mansion, warm and safe, completely unaware of what had just happened. Uncle Richard had told him I left on my own. That I had abandoned him. That I didn't care. I tried to see him, tried to tell him the truth. But the security at our own house refused to let me in. The last thing I saw before they shut the gates in my face was Daniel watching from the window, confused, unsure, his small hands pressed against the glass. And then he was gone. I spent the next few nights sleeping wherever I could. Bus stations. Park benches. The back alley behind a diner that threw out leftover food at midnight. I went from having everything to being just another street kid no one gave a damn about. Hunger gnawed at me, but it was nothing compared to the fury burning inside me. I swore that one day, I would make it. One day, I would have more than Richard could ever steal. And when that day came, I would make him pay. Surviving on the streets was nothing like the life I had known before. I had grown up in a world of luxury, private schools, fine dining, vacations in Europe. But out here, none of that mattered. No one cared who I was or what I had lost. The city was cold and unfeeling, and I quickly realized that if I wanted to live, I had to become just as ruthless. The first week was the worst. I had no money, no food, and no connections. I knocked on doors, begged for work, anything that would keep me from starving. But no one wanted to hire a 17-year-old kid with nothing but the clothes on his back. The few people who were kind enough to offer me a sandwich or a couple of dollars were rare, and most others just looked at me like I was nothing more than an inconvenience. Eventually, desperation forced me into places I never thought I'd go. I spent nights at homeless shelters when there was space, but more often than not, I curled up in whatever dry corner I could find. I learned where to go for free meals, which alleys were safe to sleep in, and how to disappear when trouble came. And trouble always came. One night, a group of older guys, real street veterans, decided I looked weak. They surrounded me in a dark alley, laughing, cracking their knuckles. I barely had time to react before one of them swung a fist at me. I fought like my life depended on it. Because it did. I don't know if it was luck, rage, or sheer desperation, but I got in a few good hits before I managed to run. I didn't stop until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. I lay there on the pavement, bruised, bleeding, but alive. And that was the moment I realized something: I couldn't stay like this. I had to find a way out. The first step to success. A week later, I found my break. I was lingering outside a small diner, hoping the owner would throw out leftovers, when I heard two men talking about needing extra hands for a construction site. I didn't think, I just ran up to them and begged for a chance. I told them I could work harder than anyone else. That I wouldn't complain, wouldn't cause trouble. They took one look at my ragged clothes and laughed. "Kid, you ever done real work before?" "No," I admitted. "But I'll learn." Something in my voice must have convinced them, because one of them, Frank, sighed and told me to show up at dawn. That job saved me. It was backbreaking labor, hauling bricks, mixing cement, sweating under the brutal sun, but it was honest work. And it paid. Not much, but enough for me to eat and rent a cheap room in a rundown boarding house. For the first time since my uncle stole my life, I had something of my own. I didn't stop there. Every night, after my shift, I used what little money I had to buy second-hand books on business and finance. I read under the flickering light of my room, absorbing everything I could. I knew that lifting bricks wouldn't get me to where I wanted to be. But knowledge? That was power. And power was exactly what I needed. Climbing the ladder. Over the next few years, I worked my way up. From construction, I moved into sales, taking a job at a used car dealership where I learned how to convince people to buy something they weren't sure they needed. From there, I took night classes, got a certification, and landed a job as a junior analyst at a small investment firm. I was relentless. While others wasted their time at bars or watching TV, I studied. I networked. I built relationships with people who mattered. And slowly, piece by piece, I climbed higher. By the time I turned 25, I had my own company. It started small, just a real estate firm handling small property deals. But I had learned how the game worked. I knew where to invest, who to trust, and when to take risks. And those risks paid off. Within a few years, my name started appearing in business magazines. Deals got bigger. My bank account grew. And then, one day, I saw his name. Richard. My uncle's business was struggling. He had made bad investments, spent too much, and trusted the wrong people. He was bleeding money. It was poetic, really. The man who had stolen everything from me was now one bad deal away from losing it all. And as fate would have it, I was in the perfect position to make that final deal. The moment I saw that, I knew it was time. Time to face the man who had thrown me away. Time to settle the past. Time for revenge. It was surreal, standing outside that office building, his office building. Only, it wasn't really his anymore. Not for long. I had spent years preparing for this moment, but now that I was here, staring up at the glass tower that bore my uncle's company name, I felt something unexpected. Calm. There was no anger, no rush of emotion. Just certainty. Richard had taken everything from me, but I had built something far greater. I had built myself. And now, he was about to lose everything. I stepped inside, my polished shoes echoing against the marble floors. The receptionist glanced up, her eyes widening slightly as she took in my expensive suit and sharp posture. Years ago, they wouldn't have let a kid like me through the front doors. But now? Now, I belonged here. Michael Carter, I said smoothly. I have an appointment with Mr. Holloway. She nodded quickly, picking up the phone. Yes, sir. He's expecting you. I took the elevator up to the top floor, the tension in my chest barely noticeable. When the doors slid open, I saw him, Uncle Richard. Time had not been kind to him. The man who had once towered over me, confident and untouchable, now looked tired. Weary. The years had added weight to his frame, and the stress had left deep lines on his face. Michael, he said, forcing a smile as he stood. My God, look at you. It's been years. I didn't return the smile. It has. He gestured to the seat across from him. Please, sit. I didn't. Instead, I looked around his office, taking in the lavish decor, the antique desk, the leather chairs, the expensive art on the walls. It was all a lie. A desperate attempt to cling to an image that was already crumbling. You know why I'm here, I said. Richard sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. Michael, I won't pretend I handled things well back then. But I did what I thought was best. You were young, Anne. Stop. My voice was cold. We both know that's bullshit. You didn't do what was best for me. You did what was best for you. His jaw tensed, but he didn't argue. I know about your debts, I continued. I know that your company is weeks away from collapse. And I know that the only way out is the deal you're about to sign. He exhaled, nodding slowly. That's why I wanted to meet with you. I was hoping we could. The office door opened, and another figure walked in. Daniel. I hadn't seen my little brother in over a decade. But he wasn't so little anymore. The last time I had looked into his eyes, he was a confused 10-year-old watching me disappear through the gates of our childhood home. Now, he was a man in his early 20s, and yet, he looked lost. His clothes were expensive, but his face was pale, his posture uncertain. "Michael," he said hesitantly. I took a slow breath. "Hello, Daniel." His lips parted like he wanted to say something else, but no words came. And I realized, in that moment, that my uncle had kept us apart on purpose. Daniel had grown up thinking I had abandoned him. "How long has it been?" I asked him. "Since I was a kid," he admitted. He looked at Richard, then back at me. I didn't know what happened. "Uncle Richard always said you left because you didn't want to deal with responsibility." I almost laughed. The audacity of it. Richard sighed. "Michael, the past is the past. What matters now is the future. You have a successful company, I have a business opportunity that can save mine. If we work together, we could." "No." The word cut through the air like a blade. Richard blinked. "No?" I stepped forward, placing a thick folder on his desk. "That deal you're about to sign? It's already been bought out. By me." His face went pale. I leaned in, lowering my voice. "Your company is dead, Richard. It just doesn't know it yet." Silence. For the first time in his life, Richard Holloway had nothing to say. Daniel looked between us, his brow furrowing. "Wait, what's going on?" I turned to him. "It means your uncle doesn't own a damn thing anymore. His company, his money, gone." Richard's hands gripped the desk, his breaths uneven. "You don't have to do this." I tilted my head. "You didn't have to do what you did to me." "But you did." His throat bobbed. "Michael. I'm your family." I studied him for a long moment. Then, finally, I smirked. "That's funny," I said. "Because for the last decade, I've been fine without one." I turned to leave, but a hand grabbed my arm. "Daniel." "Michael, wait." His voice was softer now. "I didn't know about any of this. I swear, he hesitated. "I don't have anywhere to go." I frowned. "What are you talking about?" Daniel hesitated before admitting, "The money's gone. The inheritance. I spent it all. I was stupid. I thought it would last forever." His fingers tightened around my sleeve. "I need help." I pulled my arm away. The irony of it. The same family that had left me with nothing was now standing in front of me, begging. I looked at Daniel, then at my uncle. This was it. The moment I had been waiting for. The moment I had power. But what was I going to do with it? Would I help my brother? Or would I walk away, just like they had walked away from me? I had a choice to make. For years, I had dreamed of this moment. Seeing Richard powerless. Watching Daniel realize the truth. Holding all the cards, just like my uncle once did. And yet, standing there, watching Richard's face grow paler by the second, something felt off. He had taken everything from me. He had left me on the streets, abandoned me without a second thought. The man deserved to lose everything. But Daniel? Daniel had been a kid. He hadn't chosen this. He hadn't known. And now, he was just as lost as I had been. I exhaled slowly, then turned to Richard. "You have 24 hours to pack your things and leave the building. The company is mine now." His jaw tightened. "You don't have to do this." I smirked. "You're right. I want to." A flicker of anger crossed his face, but it was quickly swallowed by fear. He knew he was done. He had spent years living like he was untouchable, but the house of cards had finally collapsed. I turned to Daniel. "What about me?" he asked, his voice hesitant. "What about you?" I shot back. His face reddened. I'm sorry. For everything. If I had known the truth, I wouldn't have." "You wouldn't have what?" I interrupted. "Wouldn't have spent the money? Wouldn't have believed the lies?" I shook my head. "Daniel, you never even looked for me. Did it ever cross your mind to question anything?" His mouth opened, then closed. He had no answer. I sighed. "I'm not going to leave you on the street. But I'm not going to hand you an easy life either." His brows furrowed. "What do you mean?" I pulled out a piece of paper from my briefcase and slid it across the desk. "A job contract," I said simply. "Entry level. Minimum wage. You want a place to stay? You earn it." Daniel's eyes widened. "You're making me work for you?" "No," I corrected. "I'm giving you a chance to prove you're not just another Holloway who takes and takes." His lips pressed into a thin line. I could see the battle in his eyes. The pride. The humiliation. But also the desperation. He swallowed hard and reached for the contract. Richard, who had been silent this whole time, finally snapped. "This is ridiculous," he spat. "He's your brother. You should be helping him, not making him grovel for a paycheck." I let out a cold laugh. "You mean like how you helped me?" Richard's mouth snapped shut. Daniel hesitated for a long moment before signing the paper. His hands shook slightly, but he signed it. "I'll take the job," he said quietly. I nodded. "Good. Your shift starts Monday. Don't be late." Daniel looked down, his shoulders tense. He had never worked a real job in his life, and he knew it. But if he wanted my help, he was going to earn it. As I turned to leave, Richard spoke one last time. "You think this makes you better than me?" His voice was low, bitter. "You think ruining me changes the past?" I stopped at the door, glancing back at him. "No," I said. "But it sure as hell feels good." And with that, I walked out. The days after taking my uncle's company were strangely quiet. I had spent years working toward this moment, picturing the fallout, imagining how it would feel to watch Richard's empire crumble. But after the takeover, there was no grand explosion, just the slow, pitiful unraveling of a man who had once thought himself untouchable. True to my word, I gave him 24 hours to clear out. He tried to fight it, of course, called in every favor, threatened lawsuits, but there was nothing he could do. The contracts were airtight. The board of directors had already turned against him. He was finished. On the morning of his final day, I received a call from security. "Sir," the guard said, "Richard Holloway is in the lobby. He's demanding to see you." I glanced at the clock. It was barely past 8. The man must have come straight from his house. I considered ignoring him, letting him stew in his failure. But something made me say, "Send him up." A few minutes later, the elevator doors slid open, and Richard stepped into my office. He looked hollow. His once perfectly tailored suit hung looser on him, and the confidence he had always carried like a shield was gone. For the first time in his life, he was the one with nothing. I leaned back in my chair. "You're early." He didn't respond right away. Instead, he slowly walked toward my desk and sat in the chair across from me, the same chair I had refused to sit in during our last conversation. "I built this company," he said quietly. I tilted my head. "No. My father built this company. You just stole it." Richard exhaled sharply through his nose. "Michael, he stopped himself, then sighed. "I know you have no reason to believe me, but I never wanted to throw you out. I thought you were too stubborn to listen. I thought if I took control, I could make things easier for Daniel." I let out a dry laugh. "Easier?" You raised him to be useless. Richard flinched. I shook my head. Daniel had everything handed to him, and look where that got him. He wasted everything, because you never taught him how to stand on his own. Richard's hands clenched into fists. He was a child. What was I supposed to do, throw him to the wolves like I did to you? I stood up, my temper finally rising. You didn't throw me to the wolves, Richard. You threw me away. Like I was nothing. Silence. For the first time since I was 17, I saw something in his eyes I had never seen before. Regret. He looked down at his hands, exhaling shakily. I knew what I did was wrong, he admitted. But by the time I realized it, too much time had passed. You were already gone. I folded my arms. That's a weak excuse. He didn't argue. After a long pause, Richard finally lifted his gaze. So, what happens now? I stared at him for a long moment. This was it, the final choice. The moment I had spent years working toward. I could destroy him completely. I could buy out his house, his remaining assets, leave him with nothing but the clothes on his back. Or I could let him walk away. I tapped my fingers against my desk, considering my options. Then, finally, I spoke. I don't care where you go, I said. I don't care what you do. But you're never going to work in this industry again. You're done. Richard swallowed hard. He knew better than to fight me on this. After a long moment, he slowly nodded. Understood. He stood, straightened his suit, and turned to leave. But just before reaching the door, he hesitated. I was wrong about you, he said quietly. You're not like me. I narrowed my eyes. I know. And with that, he walked out of my life. Forever. Richard Holloway disappeared after that day. I heard whispers that he moved to a smaller city, trying to start over. He was too proud to beg for help, and after the way he burned bridges, no one was willing to give it. I didn't care. The moment he walked out of my office, he became irrelevant. But Daniel? Daniel was still here. For the first few weeks, I kept my expectations low. I had given him a job, but I wasn't about to hold his hand through it. If he wanted to prove himself, he had to do it on his own. And at first, he struggled. Hard. He wasn't used to working, and it showed. He was sloppy, careless, and slow. He came in late a few times, clearly not used to waking up early for a job. I almost fired him. But something made me hold back. Because for the first time in his life, he was trying. I saw him slowly start to change. He came in on time. He stayed late. He started asking questions, real questions, not just the kind you ask to get by. And then, one night, I found him in the office library, poring over financial reports. You're still here? I asked. Daniel startled, looking up from the papers. Yeah, he said, rubbing the back of his neck. I was just trying to understand this stuff. I frowned. Why? He hesitated. Because I want to do something with my life. I studied him for a long moment. The kid who had once been spoon-fed everything was finally hungry. Finally, I nodded. Good. Keep working. And he did. Over the next few months, he improved. He wasn't a natural businessman, but he was learning. I saw pieces of myself in him, the desperation, the need to prove something, the fire that only losing everything could ignite. And so, for the first time in over a decade, I started treating him like my brother again. We started having real conversations, not just about work, but about life. About the past. One night, he finally asked the question I had been waiting for. Do you think we'll ever be like we used to be? I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. No, I admitted. We can't be. Too much happened. Daniel looked down, disappointed. But, I added, that doesn't mean we can't be something new. He looked up, hopeful. We lost our family once, I said. I don't want to lose it again. Daniel swallowed hard and nodded. Me neither. And just like that, we started over. Epilogue. Years passed. Daniel worked his way up in the company not because I handed him anything, but because he earned it. He proved he wasn't just a spoiled kid anymore. He learned from his mistakes, and eventually, he became someone I was proud of. As for me, I kept building, kept growing, kept moving forward. But I never forgot. Not where I came from. Not what I had lost. And definitely not what I had survived. I used to think revenge would be the most satisfying thing in the world. That the moment I crushed Richard, I would finally feel whole. But in the end, revenge wasn't what made me whole. It was the choice to be better. Better than Richard. Better than the bitterness. Better than my past. And that? That was the greatest victory of all.